Mr. 10%, the big guy, President Biden, was up in the Cheesehead State, north of the Cheddar Curtain, yesterday, Wisconsin. And he was touting his accomplishments, the impact of legislation he's shepherded, for example.
But then, when I signed the bipartisan infrastructure again, which...
Yeah.
What did he say?
When he signed the bipartisan
I love my Balaxavatarigan.
Yeah, the bipartisan phylloxyturigan is something that Captain Kangaroo, formerly Captain Kangaroo, now Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen.
Didn't she eat that when she was overseas?
The bipartisan phylloxyturigan, yeah.
Well, no, she had like hallucinogenic mushrooms served, and now they're sold out at the restaurant where she ate.
She had a good time in Beijing with her comrades.
Because when I think of hip and cool, I think of Janet Yellen.
Since the Inflation Reduction Act, also known as the bipartisan influxoturigan, since its passage, we've begun providing the long-term certainty that businesses need to invest at scale. Boy, that sounds good, huh? With expanded demand and supply-side tax incentives, companies in this clean energy industry are finding an even greater commercial case to invest in the U.S., creating high-quality, well-paying jobs. The Inflation Reduction Act, or the bipartisan
capacitator.
Yeah, it does sound like the professor on The Simpsons a little bit. But that's helping to power a boom in U.S. factory construction spending, doubled in real terms since the end of 21. Since Biden took office, companies have committed more than $500 billion in investments in clean energy and manufacturing. That's wonderful. So they're putting up 35 cents on the dollar that you're putting up. So what a deal they're getting, huh? Not the taxpayers, what they're getting. Right. That's how rent-seeking kleptocracies work. I'm seeing these green shoots emerge all around the country. Of course you are. You throw money at a particular sector, particular businesses, they're going to take it for the most part, unfortunately. For more on the bipartisan phylloxyturigan and the impact, we're pleased to be joined by Jim Iuorio, host of the Future's Edge podcast, frequent guest on Fox Business, also the proprietor of Brandt's Restaurant in Palatine. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dan. There was a moment of panic where I tuned in. I was on the phone, and you played that tape, and I thought you were going to ask me to comment on what he said. And I was like, oh, crap. I did not have enough coffee for this. Sounded like he said Velociraptor flux capacitor.
Yeah.
And I did
so
not
when
have
that
any
so
comment
what
on
it so the Velociraptor flux capacitor legislation that was passed in a bipartisan fashion. You've heard Janet Yellen's assessment of the impact. What's yours?
Well, it's sad to me, and this is, I know, the 1-year anniversary of it yesterday. It's sad to me that, like in the past, it seems like they would name a bill that had something in connection to what the bill is. But this one, they might as well have named it, Save the Puppies, because it's not only does it not address inflation in any way or even attempt to, they just mentioned the fact that it's putting the onus on many companies with increased regulation for climate initiatives. That's inflationary. It's increasing spending massively from the federal government. That's inflationary. This notion of what they're going to do in Texas and Louisiana, where they're building these giant-sized carbon-sucking machines that's supposed to cost $1.5 billion. When people like you and I read that, when they say $1.5 billion, they mean $10 billion, right? That's how the government estimates these things. But they say it's going to create 5,000 jobs. 5,000 government jobs might be a nonsense initiative, probably is. The whole thing is so frustrating to me. It's mind-blowing how inflationary this piece of legislation is. And granted, it's not doing a ton of damage right now, but as we extend it out, it's just an absolutely inflationary bill that's called what do they call it again? Whatever is Velociraptor Inflation Reduction or Save the Puppies.
Yeah, and on the carbon emissions piece, because we got to get to net zero here by 2030 before the planet explodes into a ball of fire. Funny thing happened. The spending is up 1.2 trillion. The benefits seem not to be, because carbon emissions actually increase. Not that that's a bad thing, but it is to them. So I'm just using their own standards to assess what they said was going to happen versus what has happened. Worldwide investment in renewable energy has exceeded investment in fossil fuels in recent years. But global CO2 emissions grew 12% faster in 2022 than energy consumption did. So the handouts don't seem to be working.
How dare you? Are you suggesting that a government product is not achieving its stated goal? How dare you?
Yeah.
I'm insulted. I think it's unpatriotic.
Yeah, I know, but it's indictable. Yeah. No, I understand, but I mean, it's just the whole. I mean, just this whole economic scam they're running in addition to scientific.
And it's not just guys like you and I saying this. There is 3 different Nobel Prize-winning scientists, and I'm not a huge fan of the Nobel Prize, particularly as it extends to economics. I think they've given it to absolute fools over the last 20 years. But
I mean, like Paul
science,
Krugman?
if we're to believe, exactly, Paul Krugman, even Richard Thaler. I mean, I think that it's. We could have a whole show just on the economists they've given that award to. But let's just say for a second that the scientists they give it to are some people who are smart and have made some actual real contributions. But we have to assume, too, that they lean a little bit their way politically, which is a little bit left. So for 3 of them to come out, including the one from last year, and say that this climate change initiative can be very disruptive, it could do more harm than good, is a big deal. And the fact that they cancel those guys right away, and like as soon as I'm surprised they don't take the award back, but they can't go on TV and say those kind of things. This is really scary to me. Now, I believe that the environment is something the right, conservation conservatives, it's right in the name, should kind of take back. But the notion of going to net zero and doing it so abruptly is absurd at best.
You were talking about this being inflationary and in part helping fuel the spike in inflation over the last year.
Mm-hmm.
That's now calmed down, and we're not paying attention to it so much anymore, and it's not such a big deal anymore, even though people, like regular people, are still feeling the effects of it at the grocery store and at the pump. But there's some renewed concern because of retail sales in July exceeding economists' forecasts. I don't know why this, a tenth of a point or a couple tenths of a point on things like retail sales always sends these people into a lather. It's sort of ridiculous. It seems very performative to me. But now concerns renewed about whether or not the inflation beast has been tamed because of these retail sales figures. What's your take?
So there's a couple different conflicting things that I'm looking at. First off, credit card debt has risen at the highest rate and really the highest slope ever, up to $1 trillion. Now that debt, too, is being serviced at a much higher rate than it was before due to the climb in interest rates. I think that that's a very bad sign for the lower half on the economic ladder in this country. Now, the retail sales numbers came out good. I'm starting to look at some government data with a little bit of a side eye because we've seen so many things corrupted that are just, the curtain's been pulled back that I wonder about these things. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, is that, I think something happened to people with money over the last few years, and there's this kind of YOLO attitude, and we will pay for things today and not worry about tomorrow because tomorrow could be disrupted from us like it was before. So I think the people with money, and there's still money that was injected into the system, an extra $5 trillion by my calculation was pushed into the system based on COVID relief, COVID mitigation, whatever they want to call it. And of that money, they've only pulled about half of it back. This is ahead of the normal schedule. So there's still a lot of money that's still pumped into the system. And to see that show up places like this, I guess is not the most unusual thing in the world, but I do think we're heading for a bigger problem.
Well, why don't they return the COVID funds that haven't been used to the Treasury?
Nobody returns money, I don't think.
Can we try something new here?
Yeah, but that's pretty radical, isn't it? Someone giving money back? That doesn't seem... And again, when they put that money out there, like in the form of PPP and COVID loans and payments stopped for student loan, all those things, that money just, as soon as it escapes, it's like, can I say peeing in a pool? I mean, it's just gone. It's you can't get it back out. It's like putting something on the internet. It's there forever. So I think it's hard for them to extract liquidity from the system. I think they're doing an okay job. But them two money supply has declined like almost 5%, but it had increased like 17% over the last 3 years.
And so we had this moment where for a second we thought maybe we're being a little too profligate when the rating agencies downgraded U.S. debt, and there were rumors that some of the big banks, I mean, even like a Northern Trust, could see a credit downgrade. But that quickly subsided, and let's get back to business, behaving the way we've always behaved. What about that little brief moment where there was some concern about the order of the fiscal house, both big banks as well as big government?
Yeah, and so that's real. Because Fitch, there's a couple different elements to this story too. Like Fitch, these rating agencies exist to like rate bonds and be a buffer between the average investor of bonds. To come out and have a comment on U.S. Treasuries, which are the most analyzed, overanalyzed by people way, way more sophisticated than Fitch, for them to come out and downgrade U.S. debt is a little bit, let's call it odd. That being said, the points they make are extremely valid, and I'm hoping they're waking people up to it. We spend like drunken sailors. Even like over the last 3 years, at the same time the Federal Reserve is trying to put the brakes on inflation, you can literally make a case that the federal government was trying to make it worse at every place. And the Inflation Reduction Act, just to mention one more time, not only did it not reduce inflation, and it was not neutral on inflation, it was highly inflationary. I know we said that once before, but I think someone's just tuning in. That's an important piece of information. So they are trying to fuel inflation. So for Fitch to say, keep an eye on these guys, it's fairly valid. And by the way, a lot of their downgrade too is about dysfunctional government and potential for standoffs that that result in technical defaults or in government shutdowns, which is the dumbest thing ever. It shuts down like 2% of total government domestically, and we call it a government shutdown. I call it a good start.
Well, but what about on the private sector side and banks and the concerns still about commercial real estate, office space, the vacancies, notes coming due, what the unwinding of that's going to look like? Has that already been built into the system, or are we still in murky waters?
Well, it's murky waters, but think about it this way, is that let's just tease out the top 10 banks, which Janet Yellen in front of Congress basically said to all of us, if you are strategically important, if you are systematically important, we will save you. If you're not, we won't. But anyway, let's hit the top 10 banks, because I personally believe that all we are heading for over the last 25 years is a nationalization of the banking system, and I believe we almost are there already. They have comments on everything that banks do, and the government feels that they control it. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is there is a backstop. The government will not let Bank of America fail. They might let some podunk bank in the middle of Iowa fail, but those aren't for the system. That's not the shares that we as investors in our mutual funds and our ETFs hold. Those ones are going to be protected. So I think what will happen is, as those banks start to reveal that they have bad debt, bad commercial loans, you think about it this way. 30 years ago, there was 15,000 banks in this country. Now there's 4,000 banks. I think by the time we leave this earth, there'll be about 50 banks, and they'll all be completely controlled by the U.S. government. And I think we're heading in that direction. I think the backstop exists for the big banks, not for the small ones. But the big banks happen to be the ones that we all hold shares in. So it won't be as visible as it could be.
Well, that's interesting. Boy, if that comes to pass, I mean, that makes the prospect of a central bank digital currency that much more frightening, doesn't it?
Seems like a lot of those things line up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It definitely makes it extremely frightening, and I think that's the direction we're going to. And even if you look at little things, too, like even I hate to be this conspiracy guy, except that every conspiracy we hatched over the last however many years has seemed to come true. But you look at like brick and mortar retail, and something that Lori Lightfoot said a couple of years ago. Well, if you don't want to get robbed, don't carry so much cash. She said to business people. You guys remember that, right?
Oh yeah, she wants the street vendors to be cashless.
Exactly right. So now we're seeing these not being enforced in urban areas, and people are coming into these places. Remember, brick and mortar stores are where people spend cash. If everything moves to the internet, nobody will spend cash anymore, and that's the perfect thing to step us into central bank digital currency. Which, by the way, then it's game over for freedom. There is no possible way that on day 2 they won't be scrutinizing people's behaviors and spending patterns and deciding what their social credit score is. Now, throw in one more element to this, too. These guys who push for universal basic income, and it's a growing thing where, because of technology, everybody should get a stipend for the government. That's the door to open to central bank digital currency, because that you have to sign up for it. This is a speculation, but I'd be willing to wager on it. You have to sign up for the central bank digital currency in order to get your UBI. So again, boom, everyone's bought and paid for. The next thing you know, you have to pay your taxes in central bank digital currency, and then there we are.
Well, boy, that's quite the dystopian picture that you paint.
Good morning.
You should write a novel. I think you've got the plot line there. But the other thing about this too, I mean, just going back to the idea short term that the government is going to be a backstop for the big banks and creating the same old moral hazards they always create. But then, but that's inflationary. So here because you're having to invent money to bail out these banks. Like we saw happen earlier this year. So I mean, just to be clear, again, what people should understand is you, middle-income family, playing by the rules, you're going to be bailing out those big banks. When they say the government is the backstop, you're the backstop because you're going to realize higher prices for the necessities in life in order that Jamie Dimon or Bank of America has a backstop.
There's zero question about it, and I'll even take that to a greater extent. I post this every couple weeks and try to explain how the inflation was 100% intentional. That's not a speculation. The Federal Reserve and even members of the federal government for decades talked about how they really wanted inflation. The inflation they wanted was to bail out debtors, and particularly the 5 states, we are one of them, who had these insurmountable pension debt, but it all of a sudden becomes a little bit more surmountable, if that's a word, if all of a sudden there's 8 to 9% inflation and every transaction is being taxed at that. It's the same thing with the banks. If we bail out the banks, we create money. We create money, it dilutes the value of the currency. Your buying power goes down, and they hope you don't notice. They hope it's too complex an issue for you to go, the government creates money, and all of a sudden a loaf of bread costs 40% more. It's interesting, but they're hoping that we are too dumb to notice this. And you know what? In some ways, they're right, and that's so frustrating.
Indeed it is. Jim Iuorio, host of the Futures Edge podcast, frequent guest on Fox Business, and the proprietor of Brandt's Restaurant in Palatine. Jim, thank you as always.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Hey, business owners, are you wondering how to grow your business? Do you need cash flow and a ready source for financing? Well, Signature Bank can help. Hi, Mike Gallagher here to let you know that Signature Bank's loan decisions are made locally by a team who knows your name, cares about your business, and is invested in your success. When you need advice about your business or even